If you're struggling with the start of sock knitting, I'm going to show you what I recommend that will hopefully help alleviate the problems that you could potentially be having. So I recommend casting on all of the stitches on a straight needle. So this is not the correct size. I don't actually own 2.25 double pointed needles because that's just not the way I normally knit my socks or ever knit my socks. So I just grabbed one that a smaller gauge needle that I have. And I did measure it because I wasn't sure. It's 7 inches long, but whatever length of double pointed needle that you have already, that would hold the full number of stitches that you would need to knit a sock. So for a standard adult sock, you're usually looking at 64 stitches. Whatever one you have or whatever length you have is totally fine. It'll work. I'm not going to cast on all of the stitches for just the sake of this tutorial, but just know that you do want to cast on the full number of stitches for your sock pattern on one needle, and your needle should be the size that you're going to use to knit your sock. So I'm just going to cast on some stitches so that I can model for you how to make this work more easily, especially if you're not already proficient in, say, knitting on magic loop. So I'm just going to cast on some stitches so that I can show you. Oh. Okay, I've casted on 32 stitches, which is half of the 64 stitches that you would normally cast on for an adult-sized sock. But you would go ahead and cast on all 64 stitches. You want to do all of your cast on one needle. So now that you have all of your stitches, we need to divide the stitches onto your needles. There are a couple of options. So, and this is going to be based on your preference and how you prefer to knit small circumference knitting. So the first way I'm going to recommend to you is by using two short circular needles or shorter circular needles. I don't have two that match in needle length here, but they're pretty close in cable length. So it'll work for this. And it doesn't, you can use two circular needles to knit small circumference knitting no matter what the length of the cable is. So what I would do then is I would transfer half of these stitches onto one needle. I find it easier to transfer stitches on the purl side. So I'm going to I turned my needle over and I'm just going to transfer them straight from this needle to this needle. And half of 32 is 16. So I will just slide them over. I'm not going to twist them or do anything crazy. I'm just merely sliding the stitches over. I'm slipping them. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Okay, now I have half of my stitches on this needle. Now take your other circular needle. It should be the same gauge needle, of course, and you will just go ahead and slide all the rest of those stitches, and you can double count while you go just to make sure that you did in fact cast on the right number of stitches. I'm just going to go for it. Okay, so now I have half of my stitches on one circular needle. I'll show that whole thing to you. And the other half of my stitches on this slightly longer needle. Okay, this is going to be where the working yarn is coming out. That's going to be the last stitch, right, of our round. So I'm going to carefully slide my needle all the way through, just like that. Okay, and then so we have it like this, and then I'm just going to sort of move my needle around so that now the stitches are all lined up and ready to begin working in the round. Sorry, this is going to be a little noisy because I have my needles just kind of clanging, hanging below. But do you see how these stitches are all nicely lined up? They're not twisted. I haven't twisted anything in between, and those stitches are all lined up as well. And now we will just start many socks. Certainly mine I'll do. Start with knit 2, purl 2. So I just want to show this to you as I'm doing it. If you pinch this back, the back needle with where the stitches are on the cable here, with your, I use my middle finger and my thumb on the top needle here as I tension my working yarn. Okay, so I just kind of pinch it, and now I switch over to pinching with my left hand, which is I'm right-handed, I hold my working yarn in my left hand. Okay, and now I'm going to pull this a little bit more because I have just not quite enough cable here. And now I'm just going to start my knit 2. That first stitch could be a little challenging. Okay, there's my knit 2 and my purl 2. The first row is always the hardest, right? The first row is always the row where I slow down and I really try to pay attention to what I'm doing. I may recount my stitches again just to make sure that I got the right number of stitches. Okay, so that was half of our stitches. Now I have all of my sock stitches on one needle. I'm going to turn it over so I can now work the stitches that I haven't worked yet, the other half of the cast on. I think I used slightly smaller gauge needles to cast on, so this is a little snug here. Don't do that. Use the right gauge needle for your cast on. Okay, now I'm going to put my working yarn in between my needles here so that it's behind that front stitch. And I'm going to pick up my other circular needle and I'm going to work these last stitches. Do that again because it got blurry. Okay, and you can also kind of scoot this out so you're working, your back stitches are on the cable, which helps loosen it up a little bit, make it more possible, easier to pick up those stitches. And I switched to knitting English style throwing just because I thought that might be nice for you to see if in case your working yarn is you keep it in your right hand. Again, those first stitches and those last stitches are always the trickiest. This last stitch is going to be nice and loose because of that being the very last stitch we casted on. Okay, so now we have this kind of crazy looking thing here. But I want to be careful not to twist my stitches as I show you. Let's see, there we go. Turn your work around. And then you're going to just slide the first set of stitches to the tip of the needle. And then you can go ahead and continue on with your next row, or round rather. Okay, so you're just kind of switching back and forth to working one needle to the other. And it doesn't matter if your cables are the same length or not, it doesn't actually really matter. So that's how you would start your sock, using 2 circular needles. Similarly, you could, instead of breaking your stitches into 2, dividing it in half and putting half on one needle and half on the other, if you're using double pointed needles, you could instead divide that into 3 or 3 stitches, or 3 needles or 4 needles, depending on what your preference is in terms of how many number of double pointed needles you tend to use at one time. Okay, so now I want to show you how to break those stitches for magic loop. It's the same thing. I'm going to cast on the full number of stitches onto my double pointed needle, and then I will break it up. I will show you how I break it up onto magic loop. Okay, so now pretend that I have all 64 stitches on this one straight needle. Now I just need to put them onto my needle with the long cable. So again, I'm going to turn my needle like as if we're going to work the back side of the stitches, and I'm going to slide all of the stitches straight onto one of my needles with a long cable. I typically will use a 40-inch cable for this. You could get away with a slightly shorter cable, maybe 32. I wouldn't go any shorter than that. And I'm just slipping the stitches over. Nothing fancy. Okay. Now I can get away to put away our double pointed needle. Okay, so now we need to divide this in half if you're knitting magic loop. So what I like to do, this is my technique, I take all of my stitches and I just kind of hold the stitches so that they don't twist around, but I hold them and I put them somewhere in the middle of the cable. Okay, they're all still perfectly straight. There's nothing twisted. Okay, and now I'm going to count off half of my stitches. Okay, that's the halfway mark. And what I typically do is I fold my needle, my cable. I'm making sure that I've got a little space there. And then I just grab that and I just start pulling until the needles, the join of the cable hits those stitches. Okay, and now I'm just extra careful when I'm pulling, making sure. It's just got really dark in here. The clouds covered the sun. Making sure that these stitches don't get twisted. Sometimes I'll even kind of use my stomach. You can't see this. Maybe I'll zoom out a little bit. Yeah, I can't get my stomach in there. I kind of prop my needles against my stomach so that I can have that leverage to just kind of slide those stitches to the end of the needles. Okay, just like that. And now I'm going to turn my needles so that they're aiming the right way, like I'm about to start knitting. And grab my working yarn, put it behind, so this is going to be my first stitch right there. and then I start knitting. I will start knitting. Well, I pull my cable out so that I have enough space for it to bend. You do need, if you're working that magic loop, you do need to have nice flexible cables. It does make a big difference. Okay, and then again, you're going to want to pinch those stitches in the back so that they don't get too loose or crazy on you or start spinning around. And then you don't have to knit that first stitch super tight, but maybe on the second stitch give it a little tightening. But it doesn't really matter too much in the end. Once you have knit your full cuff, you can use that tail to, when you're weaving in your end, to tidy up any stitch that looks kind of loose at the cast on. I find that usually by the time I've knit the whole ribbing, it's not really even noticeable. Yeah. Okay, so there we have it, the first half of our stitches, and then we will turn our needles over. It's this first round where you have to be careful about not twisting those stitches. Okay, and then as per magic loop style, you just have to slide the needle back through into the second half of the stitches. Okay. And then it's important to move your working needle to behind that front stitch. Pull your needle out so that you have room. And I'm going to do English style here. Okay. That first stitch, you don't want to tighten up too much because your stitches that you just knit are on this cable, which is a lot narrower gauge than your needles are. So don't tighten it up too much. But you can give it a nice little tug after a stitch or a couple of stitches, just to make sure that your tension is not going too wonky. Okay, and again, you've got a bit of looseness right there, but that's okay because when you knit your next round, it's gonna start snugging up and it won't even really be noticeable. And again, you can pull that tail to tighten it. That was the last cast on stitch. And then just keep going. But I promise if you keep going, it gets easier. Each round gets a little easier. And also that gap kind of closes itself up. And if it doesn't, it's just a sock. Most people aren't even going to see it. It's going to go underneath your pant leg, most likely. Perhaps not. But most people aren't going to be looking at the cuff of your socks that closely, so it's not going to really matter, right? But also you can use your tail left over from casting on to make it look a little tidier. Okay, and again, this looks really loose, and it is because I'm not knitting on the gauge of needles that I would normally use for knitting socks, but this is also appropriate for any other small circumference knitting that you're doing. If you're casting on, you can use either of these methods. And like anything, the more you practice, the better you get, and the more comfortable and confident that you get. So if you don't get it on the first try, I mean, who does really? Who gets things on the first try when they try something new? Give it another try. And if maybe by the third time you're just not getting it, maybe try using a different method. So if you were trying to use magic loop, try to give it a try on 2 circular needles. And if that doesn't work for you, maybe pick up double pointed needles and give that a try instead and see what works for you and the way your hands and brain connect and work. And I'm confident that you're going to find a way that does eventually work for you, but it just may take a couple tries to figure out, and it may take some practice too. So I hope that was helpful. Yeah, let me know if you have any other questions or comments. Thank you.